สวัสดีครับเรามาอยู่กันกับเอพิโซดแรกของ Venture Secret นะครับ
วันนี้เราจะมาคุยกันเกี่ยวกับเรื่อง mobility หรือว่าการขับเคลื่อนการเคลื่อนย้ายของคนเราจะเดินทางกันยังไงในอนาคต
เราจะมาตอบคำถามให้ฟังทั้งเรื่องทั้งมุมมองของ investor ว่าอะไรน่าลงทุนอย่างเช่นโลกเนี่ยนะครับใน10ปี20ปีข้างหน้าการขับเคลื่อนที่จะเปลี่ยนไปยังไงautonomous driving จะมาไทยหรือเปล่า hyperloop ที่โมกันนี่จริงหรือเปล่าจะสร้างเสร็จไหมสร้างเสร็จเมื่อไหร่
แล้วเมื่อไหร่ที่เราฝันกันไว้เนี่ยว่าเราไม่ต้องขับรถเองแล้วมีโรบอทมาขับให้เนี่ยมันจะเป็นจริงไหมจะเป็นจริงเมื่อไหร่วันนี้เราก็เลยเลือกมาเป็นเอพิโซดที่1เลย
แล้วก็มารู้ด้วยนะครับว่ารถขับเคลื่อนเองได้ autonomous car อย่างเงี้ยนะครับมันต้องใช้อะไรบ้างในการทำให้มันสำเร็จได้แล้วก็ปัญหารถติดประเทศไทยอะไรพวกนี้นะครับมันแก้ได้โดยเทคโนโลยีจริงหรือเปล่าแบบใช้แบบไหนอะไรแก้ได้ดี
ซึ่งเอพิโซดนี้ที่พวกเราชอบกันมากๆเลยก็คือว่าเวลาที่เรามองบริษัทที่เกี่ยวกับ autonomous car เนี่ยจริงๆมันไม่ได้เป็นแค่แบบสิ่งหนึ่งนะมันเป็นแบบ breakdown ของเทคโนโลยีหลายๆอัน
ใช่ครับ
ซึ่งวันนี้แขกรับเชิญของเราเนี่ย expert ที่สุดละ
ใช่แขกรับเชิญของเรานี่คือแบบมองเป็นร้อยเป็นพันบริษัทในทางด้านนี้คือ
ตื่นเต้นมากที่เขามา
ใช่มาเล่าให้เราฟังว่าเนี่ยเขากำลังลงทุนอะไรอยู่ตอนนี้อะไรน่าสนใจแล้วก็ถ้าคุณเป็นคนที่อยากจะสร้างสตาร์ทอัพเกี่ยวกับเรื่องเนี่ยครับการขับเคลื่อน mobility ที่ไทยอย่างเงี้ยครับอะไรที่น่าสนใจอะไรที่นักลงทุนเขาอยากลงทุน
Welcome to an episode. Today we are with Lydia. She's an investor at G2VP. I will leave it to her to introduce and then talk more about herself. I think it's better.
Thanks for having me, and happy to tell you more about what I do and also more about the fund I currently work at. G2VP spun out of Kleiner Perkins in the summer of 2017, so about 2 years ago. It spun out of the Green Growth Fund at Kleiner, which was $1 billion clean tech-only fund, which in its second half was also expanded the scope more into industrial tech. And it invested in interesting companies, including, for example, late-stage investments in Uber and DJI, the drone company, but also looked at industrial technologies. It was an investor in OSIsoft, which is an industrial data company, and a few others, including Synergistic, which is energy efficiency for schools, and then a lot of other investments.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. That's amazing. Especially, you mentioned DJI and Uber. So I think the theme today would be around mobility. And I think that is something that I think broad audience and the high fellows could appreciate it, given all the talks about Hyperloop, autonomous driving, like all these new technology.
I think G2 is invested in mobility companies, for example, Scoop. So what's the thesis around that, and how do you see the landscape of mobility? It turns out first in the US, and you lived in Bali for a while. Do you think that the same business model will be able to translate it into environment in Southeast Asia?
That's a big question, and I've spent actually a lot of time in the last 3 to 4 months. My main topic at G2 has been in autonomy. So we're currently working on an investment in the LiDAR space, and I'm very excited about that. But through that investment, so through the work of figuring out whether that's a good investment or not, we actually were able to talk to most of the OEMs, the car manufacturers, including all the big names from the US, Germany, and Asia. And we also were able to speak to tier 1 suppliers to see what they think, because at the end of the day, they produce a lot of the technologies and the OEMs assemble the technologies and create the final design. We also were able to speak to a lot of the autonomy startups, so the large companies of the world that try to build the full stack solution. And just to explain what full stack means that those are the companies like Waymo or Aurora, Argo, and Cruise that try to build the full software solution for self-driving. And that means from the way the car perceives the world, through the sensors, through the cameras, radar, LiDAR, ultrasonic. And then there's another engine called the perception stack, which figures out, okay, from this data, I know that there's a car in front of me and a truck that is about to make a left turn. Like, how do I react to this? And what is the safest path for this car to take, as to both, continue driving and then avoid any dangerous situation. So that's the perception stack decides, how the car should act in the most logical, safest manner. And that is run on a lot of compute inside the car, Maybe in the future we might be able to utilize, for example, 5G, like a very fast cellular connection to do some of that compute. Although for safety reasons and for redundancy reasons, still a lot of the compute and a lot of the decisions need to be made at the car level. So the car needs to have, imagine every car in its trunk has this massive computer which runs a lot of AI algorithms, which has a lot of maps of the area already saved. It knows helps the car position itself on the map. It has GPS connectivity, it has cellular connectivity, and then helps the car figure out at every moment in time like what is the best decision for the car to make. A lot of companies trying to work either on the full stack solution, so from the full software solution. There's a lot of companies only working on the hardware, so LiDAR, radar, ultrasonic, cameras, or some kind of combination of both. LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. That means it's a device similar to a camera that shoots out a lot of laser beams, and it has a receiver that collects the laser beams and makes a 3D point cloud of the area around you. So the same way, very similar technology as in the new iPhone 10, the one that is doing facial recognition. It actually builds a 3D point cloud of what it sees of the front-facing camera, using those lasers. Especially, they're optimized for being eye safe, and that is a very big topic also in autonomy, because imagine you have hundreds of cars, if not thousands of cars, all with these LiDAR devices that shoot out a lot of lasers, and you want to make sure not only they're safe for people around them, but also safe, don't interfere with each other and don't interfere with sunlight or with mirrors and don't create, false signals.
For those who are waiting for cars to be able to fully drive, what are some of the drivers that would get us to that point? So maybe it would be also helpful to talk to the audience about the levels of autonomy for self-driving cars. Like we want to get to level 5, and where are we right now, and what would it take for us to go to level 5? Is it the computing power or the training hours?
Yeah, and just to clarify, level 5 means like fully autonomous, where we can see a bunch of cars out there without any driver. Basically what we really imagine when we really think about autonomous driving car. So I think we are now not at that stage yet. There's a lot of development going on, just like what you mentioned. There's a lot of technology behind it. Approximately how long we could see something like that?
Level 1 and 2 are pretty much what we have today, which is like cruise control and just helping you keep the same speed, and just very simple automation, which doesn't have any intelligence behind it. Level 3 is where we start getting to what, for example, Tesla today can do, which is you can be on the highway and you can keep the same lane. So level 3 is ADAS, which is driver assist systems. And Cruise has a system called Super Cruise, where some of their premium cars are able on the highway to keep the same lane, but they're not able to figure out if there's, for example, construction, or if there's like a car that stopped on the road, some strange or unusual situation. It's not able to deal with that. So level 3, you always need to have the driver engaged and ready to react in case the car is in a situation that it cannot deal with. So that's why today, for example, GM is very interesting. They actually have a technology that watches your eyes, and it knows whether you're paying attention to the road. And Tesla has sensors in the steering wheel, and you need to keep your hands on the wheel. Otherwise, the sensor notices and the car stops. They have made sure that in L3, you still need to be engaged, and you need to react within half a second. You need to be ready to jump in and steer the car in the right direction or handle the situation. Level 4 is that when it starts to get interesting. That's when we have level 4 means limited autonomy, and different companies interpret that in different ways. That's why it can be a bit confusing. For example, L4 can be complete disengagement for limited geographic areas. So for example, in a campus, to be completely autonomous just within that one campus, or within the highway. So on a certain highways, to be able to disengage and fall asleep in your car. And then L5 is when you have full autonomy anywhere on any road for any type of vehicle. That's kind of the holy grail of autonomy, and that's where we're all aiming for. But that's really the hardest, like the most challenging step, mostly because you have all these special situations or so-called edge cases. We're today, so there are L3 technologies out there. You can pay a premium for your Tesla car and get that L3 capability. As Elon Musk has said, you probably soon can have, he calls it full autonomy, but it's probably more similar to an L4. And then something interesting here to be added is that Tesla is the only company, the only actually OEM that doesn't believe in LiDAR. And their thesis is that you're able to have full autonomy just with radar and camera, mostly because you as a person, like with your eyes, you're able to drive and perceive your environment around you just with the visual perception, and you don't have lasers in your eyes. Industry, for the most part, has agreed that you need LiDAR mostly for the redundancy, because you need to be, if, for example, the camera shows you data that you're not sure how to interpret, you need to have one or two more data streams that come from the radar, that come from the LiDAR, and then you fuse them together, and then you figure out, okay, maybe the camera gave me the wrong information, but the radar and the LiDAR agree that there is a truck in front of me.
In addition to the edge cases, I think there's also conversation about ethics, about like if the car runs here and then it has to choose which person to hit, like who should it hit, if it has to hit like one of the two.
Yeah, basically there was this idea that in every country there's different ethics and people would act in a different way. So they actually surveyed people, how would you react in this situation? Or how would you, who would you save? Like, do you value more the mother with the child, or you value more the old person crossing the street? And different people would react in different ways. And they had this idea that in every country you would just upload a different ethics setting for the car. I think as the technology develops and gets better, we'll start to get a more refined vision on how we should approach ethics. Right now, we're still figuring out the basics of autonomy. How, for example, how does autonomy work in a campus? How does autonomy work to bring people, to shuttle people from point A to point B? And then the focus today is just on safety. Like, how do we make sure the car just doesn't get into a dangerous situation? How do we make sure it is at least as safe as a human driver? And then the goal in the future is to be safer than a human driver. And that's where we'll start to get into more complex situations. But we're still far away from that. We're still solving kind of the A's and B's of how does autonomy work and how do we reduce latency. Latency means the time from which you perceive something, you see that there's something on the street, until the car or the vehicle actually reacts to that.
Where do you think, like, let's say like Thailand, for example, how long do you think 5 or 10 years that's possible to see an L4 layers or L4 type of autonomy there?
Those are very difficult cities. I think maybe one of the most difficult geographies, because not only you have so many cars and trucks and vans, but you also have all the scooters and bicycles and tuk-tuks. If you think about edge cases, every new type of vehicle adds an extraordinary amount of edge cases. And the way, for example, today some companies are trying to solve that is they run a lot of test fleets. So they map out the streets of Bangkok, have a full high-definition HD map of the city, so to help the car localize where it is. And then they'll also build a simulation engine. So they'll test virtual miles that are simulated. Think about it as a video game. So the car drives in a virtual environment that looks like the streets of Bangkok. And it has all the same street signs, same traffic lights, the same buildings that are mapped out. And in that simulated environment, you can test really difficult edge cases. Like, what would happen if it's night and then you have the Bangkok rainy season, which can be really intense. I've experienced it. And you have, a cyclist and a tuk-tuk coming from different angles. Like, how should the car react? And then you can keep testing and keep training the car's algorithm, the car's perception, to react to these situations and to avoid unsafe situations. And so that actually simulation has sped up the process significantly of bringing cars, kind of getting cars, vehicles ready for L4 and L5 autonomy. Specifically to your question, how long would it take to have autonomous vehicles in Bangkok. I think it would take longer than in other cities. If you compare Bangkok to, for example, Mountain View, where Waymo has been testing their cars, Mountain View is a nearly perfect condition. You don't have any snow. You have some rain, but not too much. You have perfectly mapped out streets. Every sign is there and is correct. If you go to the developing world, it's a little bit more of a challenging, messy situation. And for the algorithms to be able to deal with this chaotic environment and with more uncertainty, it's harder. So you need more training data, you need more simulation, you need thousands and thousands of if not millions of simulated miles to handle all these new situations that can arise. I think it will be able to see autonomy much quicker in simpler environments, for example, campus or universities or elderly homes, hospitals, those kind of controlled environments.
A lot of probably question around Hyperloop, right? I think a lot of people have been talking about that.
I think it's gonna happen soon.
I hope it happens as soon as possible. Hyperloop is still technological challenges. So having the capsule that transports people or cargo in a full vacuum is something that is extremely challenging to achieve. If you think about the Hyperloop, it's a tube that is several, kilometers, if not hundreds of kilometers long. And the moment you have like one, hole from which air can come in and destroy the vacuum, like the system stops working. And so I think the challenge there is to keep the loop completely isolated, to deal with high speeds. Those are speeds of, a couple hundred kilometers an hour, faster than the speed at which an airplane takes off. And to have people inside this capsule, you need to really make sure this needs to work like 100%, not 99% of the time. This needs to work 100% of the time for it to be reliable and for people to actually take it and use it as a transportation option, whether it's daily or less frequent. The problem with Hyperloop is just to see whether Hyperloop works or not, you need to put in millions of upfront investment. Whereas with autonomy, you need to put the sensors on one car and put it on the road and start testing and seeing and getting feedback. So it's easier. Obviously, you need to put many, many cars and then test, hundreds and thousands of miles. Waymo today has tested millions of miles already with their vehicles that have been driving around. And it's easier to get constant feedback and iterate. So it's much more of a software iteration cycle where you have feedback from the sensors that are on the cars right now. They perceive the world, they tell you how the car reacts, and then within the same day, within the same week, you can train the algorithm to improve. And China is a very special example because you have the government being kind of the main decision maker. Or imagine here in the US, you have the federal regulation, you have the state regulation, you have, the local DMVs having their own, deciding, how they handle autonomy and how they handle reporting and kind of give permits to each of the companies. And so in China, the reason it's been so fast, the growth of startups in that space and of large autonomy programs, is that the government has really pushed forward for those companies to, be able to test, to be able to try out different vehicles, different sensors, to collect as much data as they can, and has made it much easier for them to get certified, to get through that regulatory approval process, which here in the US and in Europe takes a lot longer. The way to solve city traffic is approaching it from a multimodal perspective. And what that means is you need to figure out, how do you deal with the short trips, the 5 to 15 minute trips. Then how do you deal with the long trips? How do you deal with city to city, when people want to go from Bangkok to the nearby Ayutthaya and the other cities around. Spend some time in Bangkok. You've seen the air and you've seen how bad the pollution can get. I think that's been an issue
in the past year.
In the past year, I've seen pictures of the sky in Bangkok. Besides just figuring out traffic, a big challenge is how do you decarbonize transportation? How do you go from internal combustion engines to batteries and electric vehicles? And that would be a large, very large change. The city still, for example, doesn't have charging stations, you know? If you all of a sudden everybody buys an electric car, an electric scooter, an electric moped, like how do you charge all these vehicles? How do you make sure that the city can support all this new consumption of electricity?
And actually today, right, like we were with an investor. Let's touch a little bit on from an investing standpoint. Like, let's say like someone wants to start something brand new in Thailand, right? Like a Thai entrepreneurs want to start some company around mobility. I think what would be interesting from an investor standpoint right now to invest.
So investors look for kind of what are the solutions that you can make money sooner rather than in 20 years. And so even though we do get very excited about the big ideas like Hyperloop and level 5 autonomy, there are solutions which work, you know, in the near future, you know, within the next 1 to 2 to 3 years. And there are not always, you know, a new technology. So it's not always creating a new battery or creating a new scooter. It's sometimes like a new business model or a new, like a platform. And maybe I should tell you a little bit more of how investors think about these startups. So for us, or at least for venture capital, you make an investment and you expect within 5 to 6 years to be able to either sell that investment to someone else or for that investment to go public and get listed on an exchange. We need to see, like, for each company we invest in, like, what is the path to get liquidity, to get to that exit in 5 to 6 years. And if we cannot see it, if it's a company that needs much more capital upfront, it has a 10-year timeline to even prove whether the technology works, it's really, really challenging. And there's still technologies try to do that, and those are extremely important. Hyperloop, for example, is one, or designing a new battery chemistry, like a more, you know, condensed battery with high energy potential. That is, of course, that is very, very necessary, but it's just doesn't fit the venture investing landscape. And for those technologies, there's other pools of capital. So that's sometimes grants from the government and then invest in those game-changing technologies. And they're not looking for a quick, you know, 5 to 6 year turnaround. They're ready. They're more patient. So it's patient capital that is willing to wait, you know, 5 or 10 or 20 years for something to work, because they look at the long term. They have the long-term view that a certain technology will really change, you know, the world.
What would be the secret about mobility, investing in mobility, or starting a company in the mobility space that you would like to share to the audience?
I thought about autonomy, and specifically for Thailand, and what could be kind of an interesting view that is relevant for entrepreneurs in Thailand. And it's probably that L5 autonomy will happen by 2050 in Thailand.
Wow.
So don't
Hyperloop is 200 more years then.
Yeah, and basically don't make a business that relies on, you know, full autonomy, but figure out what works in the near term. Like, what can we use today? What do we have available and proven that you can assemble and figure out, as you mentioned, like, what is a solution that works today?
Yeah. ถ้าชอบคอนเทนต์ของพวกเรานะครับกดไลค์ได้ที่เพจของ Venture Secret ใน Facebook นะครับ
Subscribe สำหรับวิดีโอที่เกี่ยวกับการลงทุนในสตาร์ทอัพหรือว่าการสร้างสตาร์ทอัพใหม่ๆนะคะแล้วก็เกี่ยวกับเทคโนโลยีแล้วก็เทรนด์ที่ up to date มากๆเลย
หรือว่าแนะนำ founder entrepreneur ที่สนใจอยากจะสร้างสตาร์ทอัพของตัวเองนะครับจะได้มี insider information เป็น resource ทำให้คนโอกาส success เพิ่มขึ้นแน่นอน